Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to Everything Cooperative. It's a beautiful day. And what also makes it beautiful is we have Mr. Phillip Thompson on the line with us this morning. Good morning, Mr. Thompson.
Good morning. Glad to be with you.
Thank you so very much for taking time out. I got in doing a little research on you. You're a very busy man. You got a lot on your plate.
Yes, I do.
And you're called the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives.
That's right.
How did you come about that job? What's your educational background, or what's your background?
I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to college at Harvard, and then after that, I spent 7 years as an organizer, much of it in the South. And then I went to New York City, and I went to planning school while working for David Dinkins, who eventually became the first black mayor of New York. But I worked for him when he was borough president, and also when he was mayor. And first when I got a master's in urban planning, then a PhD in political science, urban policy at the City University of New York Grad Center. And during that time, I met the current mayor, Bill de Blasio, and we both worked for Dave Dinkins, a quarter century ago. Mm-hmm. So I was I taught at MIT for 18 years as a professor of urban planning and politics, and at Columbia University before that. And I was teaching a class in the Amazonian region in Colombia, South America, when the mayor called me about a year ago and asked me would I consider coming back in the government, or had I ever thought of coming back in the government. And I told him, never.
And here you find yourself back in.
Right.
Well, what made the change?
Honestly, I felt that with Trump in office and the direction the country is headed, now was not the time for me to stay in the ivory tower. I needed to do all I could to try and create viable alternatives to what we're seeing now in public policy. Viable
alternatives.
Correct.
I like that because, we're trying not to talk about Trump, but only talk about viable alternatives. Okay. And how did you like teaching? The reason I asked it, I taught for 12 years, and I love it. So how did you like teaching?
I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed teaching in an urban planning program. At Columbia, I taught in the political science department, the business school, and the School of International Affairs. I was in 3 departments. But at MIT, the urban planning program, and MIT in general, really focuses on practical implementation and practical application. And so I got to combine research with on-the-ground work, getting students out into the field. I worked in Peru after an earthquake. I worked in New Orleans after Katrina, in Haiti after the earthquake. And really, my students and me, we learned a lot on the ground. And to me, that was richly rewarding and continues to be.
Richly rewarding with viable alternatives. All right. Taking research and make it work.
Right.
So a question I normally would ask people at the end of the program is, do you like what you're doing? But you've already answered that question.
Yeah.
You love what you do. Okay, so you said no, you weren't going to come back into public service, and then based on what's happening here in the U.S. with our current president, you said, how can I do viable options? So,
yes.
Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives, those initiatives would be viable options, I guess.
Yes, that's really my job, to help the mayor figure out how to make New York City a place where people can see glimpses of the future. things that we could do at a grander scale if only the political will existed in the nation to do things differently.
So that's quicker than I had thought, but let's figure out what are some of those initiatives? What are some of the glimpses of the future? I'm curious.
Well, one is we have the mayor initiated something called Universal Pre-K, which is quality public school education for every 4-year-old in the city who wants it. And this year we launched Universal 3K, which is the beginning of a program to offer quality public education for every 3-year-old in the city who wants it. And this is important for a couple reasons. One, research shows that what happens to kids between birth and age 5 actually is really critical for what happens when they start elementary school and go through school and later in life. So starting early is really important. Secondly, I've heard mothers tell me that they were working 2 jobs to pay the $2,000 a month cost for having their 4-year-old or 3-year-old in preschool at some private institution. And now that there's a public option, they're able to go to community college to further their own education and skills, and they don't have to work 2 jobs. And it's been enormous in terms of creating opportunities for working parents as well in the city. So that's one example.
That is great. In doing a little research for this program, it looked like those mothers, perhaps single moms, paying $2,000 a month, that might be 50% of their income.
That might be 100% of their income.
Oh, God.
And, so many parents can't work 2 jobs because they have rent to pay and everything else, and their kids simply don't get access to pre-K. So this program is making that available citywide.
Okay, so if somebody was only making $2,000 a month, then they couldn't send their kids to pre-K.
Right, they have to get a second full-time job. And many parents are doing that, by the way, because they want so much for their kids to have more opportunities than they had.
That's the American dream.
That's it.
That's the American dream. And that's why so many people want to come to America.
That's true. That's true. But it's harder and harder to realize that dream, not only in New York, but, across the country. The cost of housing in New York for families making under $30,000 a year can be 60% of their income often. It's just really hard. And wages in America haven't really increased for 30 years for most people, for most workers, not in real terms. So it's harder than ever.
So if you've got 50 to 100% of your income going to child care and another 60% going to housing, that doesn't add up to, I've got a master's in math, and I could kind of 50 and 60 is 110 or 160.
That's right.
So you can't have housing and health and child care or health care or food.
That's right. The puzzle, and don't forget finance charges. Most African-American, most Latino families nowadays don't have a regular banking account because of, high charges for having a regular bank account. And they go to these check cashing places or payday loan places just in order to access their own money. And the interest rates that they pay on average are about 400% if they were on an annual basis. So that's another big hit that low-income families are enduring as well. So the question is, how do people even survive?
That is a huge question.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge, and I guess it's people 5 and 10, 15 people living in a 1-2 bedroom.
You're right.
More and
There's
more people.
A lot of that. One of the things we're working on now is getting everyone to fill out the census, because the Trump administration has said they're going to put a question on the census: are you a citizen or not? And it frightens many immigrants who may not be here legally because they're scared to fill it out. Many of these folks are doubled up also. And in public housing, many families are doubled up, 2 families in one apartment, and they're afraid of being discovered by the housing authority. So they're afraid to fill out the census too. But if people don't fill out the census, it just means less federal money coming to New York City. So, we have to tackle these kinds of problems. Right now, just to take away the fear and make sure that people, are not penalized for filling out the census. But many, many people are living precarious lives right now.
So, Mr. Thompson, how many people are in New York City now?
Almost 9 million.
And of those 9 million, do you have a sense of how many live below the poverty line?
Well, I would say in real terms, probably close to 40%. 1 in 2 people in Brooklyn and in the Bronx are on Medicaid, which gives you some indication.
So 50% of the people in Brooklyn and Bronx are on Medicaid.
Right. And we have a huge number. We have 3.5 million immigrants, and many of them don't qualify for some federal benefits, and many of them are in poverty, and it's hard to get accurate numbers on that.
So the guess is 40, maybe up there. I was thinking if not, at least 50% of the people are probably can't afford that housing and that child care and food and health care.
That's probably about right. The top 1% of New York City residents in terms of income last year earned over 40% of all the income in the city.
The top 1% of New Yorkers earn 40% of all of the income in New York.
Right, about 42% of all the income in the city went to less than 1% of the city population.
Okay, so this really gets to this inequality of wealth and income distribution.
Right.
Okay. So this program is called Everything Co-op.
Mm-hmm.
So we've outlaid the problem really well, and Reverend Barber does a really good job. William Barber does a really good job of talking about poor people and the Poor People Campaign.
Right.
He lays it out very well also. And then it's like, what do we do about it politically and economically?
I think that is the question. And something I like to point out to African Americans is that the racial gap in income is the same now as it was in 1955. Median black workers' incomes are about 55, 56% of white incomes now. And it's the same. It was the same in the mid-1950s, before the beginning of electing black elected officials and numbers, and before civil rights legislation. So on the economic front, there hasn't been so much progress. And in terms of wealth, the wealth gap is actually expanding between most white families and most black families. And so the economic challenge that was the main concern of Martin Luther King at the time of his death, that's still in front of us. We have not tackled that. We have not overcome. We've
got to take a break and come back to that and begin to talk about some of the solutions. We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and the program is Everything Cooperative, and we have Mr. Phillip Thompson on the line from New York. He's the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiative. In the first segment, we talked about the problems of most of the people in the United States and in the world, but particularly we're talking about New York City, with a population of 9 million people, and approximately 50% of those people cannot afford the basic necessities. And Mr. Thompson is looking at different initiatives to help that. And we talked about the 4K program and the 3K program. And we'll begin to talk about some other initiatives that you're working on. Welcome back, Mr. Thompson. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure talking to you. I don't like the conversation because the income gap is tremendous. The wealth gap is even bigger.
Right.
And we normally talk about income, how much money you make, how much do you have to spend, what's your disposable income. But the real thing is how much wealth do you have, and have you been able to create wealth? And I heard a stat in D.C., and I don't quite remember, but it was something like the average wealth for a white family in the district was $250,000. And I may be off. It could have been $450,000. But I remember the black and brown family was $3,500. Was the average wealth. And that's a huge, huge gap.
Right. There was a study in Boston last year, and the black median wealth was under $700, and the white median wealth was over $150,000. Nationally, it's about 80-1 between median white and median black families, and similarly with Latinos, and it's been growing. So in about 20 years, black median wealth is projected to hit zero, and white median wealth is projected to be about $160,000.
If we don't do something.
If we don't do something, correct.
And what's so bad, when I was sitting in the room and I heard this $3,500 for the average black and brown family in Washington, D.C., and I'm going, well, mine is a lot more than that. So that means a lot of people here, they have maybe a negative net worth.
That's absolutely right. And I saw some data last year saying that for black women, the median wealth is $7.
My God.
Yeah.
My God. Oh, my God. Okay. All right. My mouth is open. All right. I had not heard that number, and that's frightening.
Yeah.
Okay.
African Americans have about as much, close to the same proportion of wealth compared to national wealth as we did in 1868.
In the midst of slavery.
3 years after slavery. Right.
Okay, so this racism continues, and the effect of it really shows if black women have a $7 median wealth. $7.
Sure. I mean, I'm 62. For a lot of African Americans of my generation, their parents came from the South, and there were no pensions, and you couldn't get in a union. And a lot of middle-aged black folks are trying to take care of their parents who don't have much to live on beyond Social Security, which isn't enough. And they're also trying to send their kids to college or help them get a start in life. And they're competing, and their kids are competing with white families that, got a house in the GI Bill, and the house appreciated in value, so they have equity, and they're able to translate that into low-interest loans or money they can give their kids to start off or pay a college tuition. And so that history, the effects of it are with us today. It's not something that's over and done with. It compounds. So that's what we're challenged with.
Well, I've got you by a couple years. I'm 71 this year.
Okay, good for you, man.
And when my father passed, he left me a $2,000 worth of bills, which I paid off. I was pleased to be able to pay that off. So that was
I am right there with you.
And I have a very good friend. He's a white guy who's a lawyer, and his father had a business, car dealership, and he grew up that way. But then they had no loans for college. He gets a car every year because he and his brothers now still own it. And he's working. He's not working there, but he gets a car. So he didn't have to pay that. And then I believe he told me that his parents gave him money for the down payment of the first home, which when they sold that in D.C., they built a home in Rock Creek Park, right in a nice area.
Yeah.
He's raised his 3 boys. They're doing extremely well. And they're great people. So I'm not knocking that. But the difference in the way they step off, the difference in the way they get started is huge. And,
yes.
And how that then translate into well-being and safety and feeling good about oneself or not. It all goes in there. So, yeah, it's major.
I will add one more statistic. I know you want to move on, but the children of the baby boomer generation, amongst 70% or so of white families, they're going to inherit over the next 20 years, roughly, $30 trillion with a T. $30 trillion. Black and Latino families will inherit virtually nothing. And as you said, many will inherit debt. And so the wealth gap is going to explode even beyond where it is now, unless something happens.
All right, I'm scared. You got me generally scared. All right, so you've got kids starting school earlier, which helps the families that they don't have to have the second job, or they can take that money and begin to build wealth after they eat and have housing. What are some of the other things? I guess in the finance charges you were talking about, that's another particular problem when people are paying a 400% interest rate to just get their own money, get their paychecks cashed, and perhaps to write checks or pay bills. So what are some of the other initiatives you're taking?
So there's a close to $1 billion a year out of city tax levy money that is being spent now for community mental health. It's a program called Thrive, and it was pioneered by the First Lady, Charlene McCray, who's African American. And the demand for mental health and social emotional learning and training and support in communities of color is just overwhelming. 8% of public school students in New York attempt suicide before graduation. And so that's just one indicator. And low-income folks don't have the resources to hire, a psychologist or a psychiatrist and to have counseling, or social supports to deal with all the pressures and tensions that they're confronted with every day. And so that's another initiative that we think is really important. If you're really stressed out about what's going on at home, or you're afraid to walk to school, or, you have other issues, it's really hard to focus in school. It's really hard to focus at work. It's really hard to think about or create your own business. So that's another one of the initiatives that's big that we've started.
Well, I know I do property management as my full-time job, and I deal with folks with mental issues, and it is a problem. It is a major problem.
Yeah.
And sometimes, they're good people and they want to do well and they have a disease. So how do you deal with this? And $1 billion is a little bit of money. That's cool, particularly since Reagan took a lot of money out of mental health.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, it's something that the city is doing of its own initiative. We'd love to see more federal support in this area. It's just one of the things that needs to happen. Okay. We're also... Well,
before you go into the next one, we've got to take our next break.
Okay.
And when we come back, I knew when we talked before we could spend 2 or 3 hours on this, but I want to get into the different things you're doing in the co-op world to help with this creating wealth and this minimizing this wealth gap.
Great.
So we'll be right back after the break. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. The program is Everything Cooperative. It's sponsored by the National Cooperative Bank. NCB was created to address the financial needs of a traditionally underserved markets and cooperatively owned organizations that operate for the benefit of their members, not outside investors. So cooperatives operate for the benefits of their members and not outside investors. And our guest today is Mr. Phillip Thompson, who's the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives. And so, sir, what are some of the things that you all in New York are doing cooperatively?
One of the first things that we're doing is engaging communities and entrepreneurs, particularly in low-income communities of color, in discussions about what I call economic democracy or economic strategy. And the conventional doctrine is that if you're going to be successful in business, you basically do it all by yourself. So it's all about building your individual skills and your business plan for yourself, etc. But if you look internationally, globally, the only countries that have really succeeded from going from being poor to being prosperous are countries that really engage their governments in working with entrepreneurs in cooperative strategies, or strategies that involve, leveraging government, but also getting businesses and workers to cooperate. And, an example is South Korea, another is Taiwan, China, Japan, Germany, Scandinavia. None of them accepted this doctrine of people are going to succeed by just doing individual strategies. If you're going to fight well-entrenched, much richer companies in an economy, then you need to band together and leverage whatever assets you have. And so that's a conversation that we're trying to promote in New York City, and actually work with folks to begin to understand what are assets that reside in communities, even if they're low income individually. So, for example, a bunch of major labor unions in New York are overwhelmingly Black and Latino, low-income Asian. And while individually these workers don't have money, collectively they have enormous sums of money.
Right.
The Hospital Workers Union, which is mainly composed of home care workers who make less than $15 an hour, has a $13 billion pension fund. The unions representing city employees have a $200 billion pension fund just in New York City. So those are assets that could be deployed differently. Similarly, the city itself is a big anchor institution that buys more food than any other organization outside of the U.S. military, that spends $20 billion a year on infrastructure, and on and on. And so those are other assets, because the people of New York, who are over 65% Black and Latino, over 70% people of color, they elect the leaders of New York City. So the resources of New York City can also be leveraged economically to help push more money into communities, get more money circulating within communities. But that requires people understanding the value of working together.
Right. Right.
So we start there.
Dr. Jessica Gordon Nembhard, in her book Collective Courage, and she's talked on the program about that those individuals, the John Wayne types, that we're going to do it ourselves, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and all of that, which I bought into, by the way, when I went and got my MBA. I bought into all of that. But that only about 10% of those businesses are still in existence after 5 years.
Right.
Those normal capitalistic kinds of business that get started. But when people come together and they share their skill sets, they share their knowledge, their experience, and whatever capital they have, then 90% of those businesses are still in existence after 5 years. Now, some businesses that would have started don't start because they learn. They find out that's not really a good idea. Let's go back to the drawing board. And some of that happens is weeded out, so there's not failure and there's learning that goes on. So that's one of the reasons I like this whole co-op world. Okay, so you train people on what this is all about and how folks can come together using the monies. And this thing in Cleveland of the universities, the hospitals coming together and helping to create businesses. So there's institutions also that have wealth and that are buying food and laundry services and other things.
Well, yes. In the New York City area, there is an organization called the Greater New York Hospital Association, and that's like a trade association of about 200 hospitals in acute care centers, and they collectively purchase about $10 billion a year in goods and services. So they are really interested in leveraging their purchasing power to help support cooperative development, because having a job and having a good job is actually the best thing for improving health. And they have seen a double benefit from leveraging resources to economically to promote both better incomes, but also better health. And that helps their bottom line as well. And so there are many anchor institutions that, we are working with in Cleveland also has been doing this with university hospitals and Cleveland Clinic, getting them engaged in screening, looking through everything they buy and purchase and saying, how much of this can we buy locally? How much of this can we steer towards businesses that have a double bottom line or triple bottom line? They're contributing to the community. And co-ops are one way of doing that. They're not a panacea.
Right.
One way of doing that. And in New York, 3 years ago, the mayor and the city council started an initiative to help support co-ops, and they put in about $3 million a year to help grow co-ops. And that has created over 100 co-ops. It's led to 600 or so hires. But what we're trying to do now is actually to scale that up through building partnerships with established co-ops and either outside of New York or internationally, inviting them to come in and team up with women and minority-owned businesses in New York City and create joint ventures so that co-ops can actually get bigger, faster. And it's great working with some of these partners because they share the value orientation of, sharing, of cooperation, of worker ownership. And so it's not taking money out of New York. It's actually just helping circulate more resources within the city.
So when you talk about economic democracy, it reminded me of the book that Democracy Collaborative wrote on communities building wealth. And in that book, they talked about Christina out of New York, who I think she was a maid, or she was either a maid or home care, and she went from $7 an hour to $20 an hour by joining the co-op, or either joining it or helping to start it.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons I like co-ops, to help create financial wealth. And she chose to work less hours and spend time with her children.
Well, yes, but I think co-ops are going to be even more important than they ever have been in the economy that's emerging. And the economy that's emerging is going to be much more technology focused. And you're going to have robotics and artificial intelligence a lot more. So you see Walmart is already using robots in some stores to stock shelves. And you see that banks are using artificial intelligence sometimes to replace tellers. If companies are privately owned, they're under competitive pressures to always, to introduce robots because it's cheaper. And that's going to lead to layoffs. But if companies are worker-owned, then they have options. They can introduce robots and then have workers have time to do upskilling or to branch off into new fields or simply to have a summer vacation where some Walmart workers might not. They have options. Mm-hmm. And so as the economy becomes more and more robotic and technological, the need for worker ownership is going to increase.
I was thinking that it was going to be that we'll get more and more worker-owned cooperatives doing the technological to creating the robots and the artificial intelligence, perhaps. I like the side effect of it. They have more choices.
The other thing is I was working with Ford Motor Company and the United Auto Workers a little bit before I took this job. And the auto companies are really beginning to invest in local manufacturing and bringing back urban manufacturing, because as cars become battery powered, a car is basically a battery and then some tires and then a bunch of component parts that you just assemble. And you can assemble those cars in a city, and you don't have to, and you can do it on demand. You don't have to have parking lots full of cars, put in super tankers shipped from Japan or elsewhere. You can assemble the cars in a small area the size of a gas station, and people can even design their own cars. And so that's where auto is headed with new technology. The UAW is saying, then the future auto worker is more like a designer and works with the client to help them think about and design the car for their own needs. And maybe co-ops are a much better form of organization for these kinds of workers who will be really designers and technicians, and it's not the old assembly line, and they're not going to like this top-down union structure that we have. So maybe the union ought to start thinking about becoming a co-op or starting more co-ops. So I think that's a second trend, which is going to be that in creating new tech and the way the economy is moving, co-ops are going to be a more attractive form of manufacturing and production.
I've been out to 2 conferences in Cincinnati where the Cincinnati Union initiative with cooperation, where the unions are doing just that.
Yeah.
And particularly manufacturing.
That's right.
And they also talked about the number of manufacturing jobs that go unfulfilled right now and how many of these businesses are owned by baby boomers. When you talked about that $3 trillion or $30 trillion was going to be turned over.
Yeah.
How much is owned by baby boomers? And often the siblings or the children don't want that business. They don't want to operate in that business. So they will either get sold or they'll close. And why not get sold to the employees? So that's one of the things that's working in this union business and within manufacturing. It's absolutely amazing if we can get the training that you're talking about to people where they understand what the co-ops are and the benefits of cooperatives.
You know, I mentioned before that I taught at MIT for 18 years. And one of the things that I don't think many people realize is what the ecosystem looks like in this innovative technological ecosystem culture. At MIT, there are 1,000 professors by statute, by university statute. It doesn't get bigger. And those professors are affiliated with about 600 businesses in the surrounding MIT. And most of those businesses, or a huge number of those businesses, are cooperatives. And the average size is 12.
What?
And enjoy working in those kinds of environments. And that is where most of the innovation happens, or a lot of in those small cooperative businesses. And then the big companies like Intel and Cisco and Microsoft and Apple, they all want to be near the cooperatives because they're so generative, the cooperatives are. And people share ideas, they have lunch. It's not very proprietary. And that is the ecosystem. That literally is what it is. And so co-ops are very popular with these young inventors. And that's the future.
That I like a lot. And when I've gone to these conferences, whether it's in Cincinnati or housing conferences or whatever, this sense of sharing information, because the 5th principle is training information, this whole piece of learning. And we're taking our final break, and we have a lot we could talk about. Thank you, sir. We'll be right back.
Sure.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and we're having a great conversation, sometimes sad, happy, joyous, with Mr. Phillip Thompson, the Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives. And we were talking about this whole sense of MIT with these 600 businesses surrounding it with 1,000 professors, and a lot of them are co-ops. I did not know that. And that's where you get all of these generative ideas. They create these ideas and they openly share them. There's sort of like this whole thing of competition doesn't happen as much in the cooperative world as it does in the shareholder capitalistic world.
That's right. And the whole open source movement is very much alive at MIT and Stanford and Caltech and these other sort of tech hubs. That's a part of the culture. And there's a battle going on in the tech world over how do you really maximize effectiveness and efficiency. Nothing is more productive than lots of people sharing ideas freely and cooperating on the internet or face-to-face. Nothing is more productive than that. And our property laws, our conventional notions of you don't share and keep everything to yourself actually limit productivity right now. It's the opposite of what is taught in orthodox economics or, 101 in business school. So these are the battles.
I have fallen in love with this co-op model. I was not taught it at Stanford when I got my MBA. I got it when I started managing housing co-ops and watching everyday people, sometimes more often than not without a college degree, get in and make very good long-term decisions that was best for the group as opposed to what's best for me, particularly when you take the greed out. Now you still have people being people, so that does flow in, but for the most part, people make extremely good decisions, and a lot of training goes on, lots and lots of training.
And the key, when you have people really engaged in running their own organization, business, they learn how to manage money, they learn how to make strategic decisions, they learn how to analyze what their competitors and other folks are doing, and that's how they build power. And, some folks use co-ops very narrowly. In New York, you have a lot of wealthy housing co-ops that exclude poor people, people of color. They're not progressive, but you have a great deal more low-income housing co-ops and others, hundreds of low-income housing co-ops that really have done, provided quality housing affordably, well-maintained for many decades in this city. So co-ops are an avenue for improving community lives and social transformation, but really for democracy, because learning how to make responsible decisions is what's key to having a healthy democracy. And cities have enormous power, particularly as we're moving to create community micro energy grids to produce energy locally, to develop new models of housing on land trust, to procure goods and resources, whether it be food or services or material goods and products. We can actually build many, many, many of these participatory, local, cooperative enterprises, and that's going to revive our democracy and give people more confidence in their own abilities.
Well, I've been trying to get Reverend Barber on the show so we could have that conversation. And I want to give a shout out to our councilwoman, Anita Bonds in D.C., who created a task force, limited equity co-op is what it's called, but it's really limited equity housing co-ops.
Right.
Because they do, and she has found out and trying to educate the rest of the council and the city on all of the benefits that these approximately 100 multifamily housing have done since the mid-'80s, mostly. And that's on a backdrop of about 150 of these wealthy co-ops in the city that have been around since the 20s and 30s. So she's got it. She's gotten the message, and I'm fortunate enough to be on that task force. And we're working with some of the people in New York to try to figure out how do you keep these alive, preserve them, and how do you create more.
Great. Yeah. I think they've been a success in New York. But I don't know if you know this. I worked with the Mississippi NAACP, headed by Derek Johnson, who's now head of the national NAACP. And one of the things we learned was that in 8 majority black counties in Mississippi, they get their energy from rural electric cooperatives that were set up by President Roosevelt through the Tennessee Valley Authority. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they're prolific in 5 southern states. We found out that these co-ops were the main financiers of the Mississippi Republican Party. And so black ratepayers in 8 counties were funding the Mississippi Republican Party, which is not known of being supported of black folks in Mississippi.
Anywhere. Okay.
Right. Okay. And so the NAACP has been doing a lot of education in the community about the importance of running people to be on these boards, the importance of black mayors who are ex officio and sit on these boards, really understanding the finances and what happens with these co-ops. And it's all about learning, how co-ops, like anything else, you have to learn how to manage them and you have to pay attention. Just saying something is a co-op doesn't mean it's going to help you. Right. But other folks have used co-ops very strategically. And so it's been great. It's a learning process.
Well, I just want to shout out to the Federation of Southern Co-ops. When you mentioned Mississippi, they're in 13 southern states, and they started in '67 after the riots and so forth. And Cornelius Blanding is running that. I'm going to have to give a shout out to him to see if he knows about that.
I'm sure he does, because they've been at this a long time, and they've been working and doing just this kind of cooperative education. But I think the opportunity right now is great because of the green transformation and the technological transformation. Green technology, whether it's energy or building retrofits or whatever, is wide open to community ownership and cooperative ownership, and so is much of technology.
Okay, sir. We only have a couple more minutes. What other message do you want to leave people with?
Well, for us, we are beginning to network with other cities. We're beginning to talk to more MWBEs about the ideas of co-ops and the values of cooperation, even amongst MWBEs. And we think we have opportunities to scale up co-ops so they actually go from kind of being small mini experiments to major employers over time. And, we are looking in our city on how to strengthen infrastructure for cooperative development. So can we, through our city university system, train lawyers on cooperative law? Mm-hmm. And we, at our business schools in the city university system, introduce curriculum on cooperative management and cooperative development? Can we find ways to finance co-ops at a higher level than we do now? So we're working to put all that stuff together so that the movement begins to build over time. And particularly as technology threatens to displace people, there are already existing alternatives and capacities to make those things happen.
Great. Now, I've been trying to get Harry Belafonte on this. And if you ever see him, I don't know if you know this story, but he tried to rent an apartment in New York. He couldn't rent it. They wouldn't give because he's black. And so he got his agent to go in and rent it for him. And before they knew it, he had already moved in. He eventually bought the building and made it a co-op. And it's a very interesting story. And he could be really, if he wanted to, people would listen to him because of his stature and what all he's done, both in civil rights and in the acting world.
New York City has something called Co-op City,
yep,
which was built in the 50s and 60s, and it has 70,000 units, and it was built 100% with union pension funds, and Harry Belafonte was around for all of that. So it's a very powerful symbol of what can happen in New York with people working together around cooperative principles. So he can talk about all of that. People have done this before. It's just now people of color, it's our opportunity to actually use it as well to deal with the kinds of problems we were talking about earlier.
Well, Martin Luther King wanted to do it. You go all the way back through history. That it's been, and we brought it over from Africa and of sharing and working together.
It's something that, Black folks have been doing for centuries. And I believe it's a competitive advantage. We're actually pretty experienced as social organization. We built the Black church from nothing. We built Black colleges from nothing. We organized the social movement, even as slaves, to win the Civil War. We actually have learned to rely on each other for survival, and we even built an identity. We didn't all come from the same country in Africa. We didn't have the same ancestors speaking the same languages. We built that solidarity. So that's what we need to do now in the economy.
And we need to tell that story more because I don't hear us talking about how we built those things and we have this solidarity. I hear more about what we don't do well together.
That's right.
I like that. That's very, very positive, sir. Very, very positive.
Thank you.
Last minute, last thought.
Well, I'm really so glad that you're having your show and this program. And, I just think we need to have a national conversation about where the economy is headed and what we need to do to change its direction. Because unimpeded, we are in danger of becoming the next Roma, the people who are called gypsies, in Europe, persecuted, divided. Anyway.
Okay, sir. That was my cue. We've got to go, but that's a good place to go. I would like to be in that national conversation. Let's see if we can't get that going. Thank you very much for your time and your knowledge. Everybody out there, please have a wonderful week. Live cooperatively.